lot of people mention like listings, like you have to be listed on TX, you have to be listed on DEXs. So I think that's one of the big challenges. I think this entire thing is pretty new. Liquidity or even interest is not yet up to the standards of Ethereum or even other ecosystems. Sometimes people might assume or think that having more listings equals higher prices, but there's no value in that if the token has no utility. And I've been saying that a lot of time because I was also one of the first buyers of all these tokens. And I can tell you right now, I'm about 90% at least down on my investment. And I want people to not make the same mistakes because I've been making them since 2016. So sometimes it's just about listening to the community, but also knowing your project and your vision well enough that you believe that in the long run, you'll be able to provide the value that you want to provide.
I am ecstatic for this show. I've been following this project for quite some time, and I was talking with Good right before this recording. I've been following all the ups and downs of the situation of MXRC. I saw the dramatic rise. I've seen all of the criticism that's existed on Twitter. I've seen the positives. I am also a holder of the coin. I'm in the community, been following along, and it seems like you guys have really made a lot of progress, but also too good. You're like this mythical figure, right? You got this dramatic rise of followers. You have this team that seems like it's from the Azuki community, and you got a bunch of like leaders. And so I've been kind of following it and observing everything that's going on. And so, I'm excited to sit here and have this conversation because you come out in limited fashion, but it seems like your tweets have quite an impact with your community. So I really appreciate you for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jake, and thank you for having me again. I'm kind of excited to do this podcast because it's also, I'd say, the only podcast I've been in since kind of this entire thing started.
Exciting. Yeah, you mentioned you said this is even your first interview. So a lot of information that we get to uncover.
100%.
And as the age-old adage or intro question goes of every podcast or every type of interview, we get to explore some of your past and at least what you're willing to share with us, as you are still like this pseudonymous character. Tell us a little bit about just who Good is. Like, what did you do before crypto, and then how did you find your introduction into it? Or is BRC really your first foray into this weird wasteland that is a digital industry?
Yeah, so absolutely not. I've been in crypto. It's been almost, I'd say, 7 years. My first introduction to crypto was in like 2016. I do think that a lot of people would have kind of started at the same time around 2016, 2017, kind of had like the same journey, right? Because there weren't that many, cryptocurrencies, even tokens or other, tokens. So on my side, before this entire crypto started, I was just a student at school. So I'm someone who's like heavily interested in anything that's, math and statistics. So my daily life consists of like being just like a data scientist working on ML stuff. So I'm nothing of like, a core dev or even like a software engineer, right? But I have always had this passion, of trying to understand Bitcoin as a whole and even the entire ecosystem, the cryptocurrency ecosystem. So my first, I think contrary to most people, right? My first introduction wasn't even to like Bitcoin. I think it was probably like Ethereum, right? It was Ethereum and a lot of other random coins, right? So my first experience wasn't really like the best because I thought at the time when I saw Bitcoin, I was like, listen, this thing was about a couple cents and it went up. I think when I first started, it was a couple grants, and I was like, I might be too late to this thing, right? Why not find something else that makes sense? Only did I know that most of these tokens that kind of came up didn't amount to nothing. Nothing was delivered. I invested in a lot of like derivatives of Bitcoin, like Vertcoin and other coins. I was trying to find like the biggest projects. I remember I kind of invested in Neo. It was called Answers at the time. So I was in the space just looking for the next big thing, right? And after a while, when I started like losing a lot of money, you know what? I said, let me try to understand, from a technical perspective, what these guys are actually trying to build. I think with this approach, I'll probably have a better chance, of finding good projects, good teams, and eventually try to contribute to it, for the long term, right? So I started looking at these projects, started capital side because I had like a part-time job. I was a student at the same time. And on the part-time side of things within the crypto, I started writing, threads, educational content for crypto. a lot of people in real life that I knew were interested in kind of investing in it. I managed to bring like a lot of people. But then, as you know, we kind of hit like the entire bear market. And of course, everybody was calling my phone like, what happened and what's happening? The bubble just burst. So, one thing I also to mention is coming from Canada, right? There's a lot more regulations and a lot more, it's a lot more difficult for people to participate in like the crypto ecosystem as a whole. So I was writing educational content. I even at the time started, some YouTube channel where I was going in depth on the technical side of some of these projects, what they were like. I really believed in these projects, right? And then when the bear market kind of hit, that's when, I wouldn't say I was less involved because a lot of people I actually knew, whether it was the influencers or even the people building, we didn't see any projects really delivering anything. The money I had spent was gone. The interest I had, I mean, the entire space was kind of dead, right? And then it kind of lasted for about a year and a half, up to 2 years, until, of course, we witnessed DeFi summer in 2020. So I missed a bit of it. When I came at the end, I was already like in the middle of these projects. I was in the middle of, understanding what liquidity pools are, what curve was, what AV was. So I was like trying to figure out what was happening, right? And then what happened next was we kind of, went into another small bear, and then we went through like the NFT phase. And after the NFT phase, now we're witnessing like the ordinals thing. So it's been a wild journey, but I've been here since kind of like the beginning. And, I didn't manage to do anything, of this size yet in comparison to like MetaBRC, but it's been a pretty like rough journey, exciting too.
We have a very similar story, actually. I came in the middle summer of 2016 as well. And you
Oh,
mentioned ant shares. That was actually something that I got really big in. That was one of my big wins in 2016, especially when I went to Neo and then just shot up over $100 when you're getting it at pennies,
yeah.
right? You're like, this is insane. I can't believe this is a real thing. Hung around. I also caught the end of DeFi summer, was playing around with like yams and Ampleforth and learning what rebases and LP pools. And then
Yep.
NFTs is where I became like really, really involved, although I was always around. That was something that really stuck out to me. And then ordinals, it really seems like it's almost a combination of all these narratives, right? The 2017 ICO summer, the DeFi summer, and NFT, it's all mixed. And you see all of this kind of emerging, and it's kind of compacted all into these things of like BRC-20s and ordinals and all these different things that are existing on Bitcoin, right? It's also
Yep.
the biggest blockchain that really exists. Were you,
Ex-
so then go ahead.
No, I was just saying your story exactly. Like I said earlier, I think everyone who kind of came at the same time must have like pretty similar stories, right? Because we started with this, small set of crypto tokens that were, extremely promising. And then we went through like the DeFi. Some of us, of course, kind of abandoned it completely. I know of a couple of people, but those who are still kind of in the game are kind of witnessing ordinals right now and are seeing a lot of potential with this, right?
It's very exciting. So then it leads me to this question, because it felt like you kind of just popped up out of nowhere, and MetaBRC did as well. Where did the inspiration come from? Did you hop onto the ordinal wave immediately at the beginning of February, or is this something that you kind of sat around and thought about and theorized of what's the right way to enter this space?
Yeah, so that's a pretty good question, right? Because it does seem that I came, out of nowhere. If you kind of look at the entire account, the history, during like the crypto 2017, I was big on crypto, right? So like I said earlier, I was writing a lot of threads, a lot of educational content, and at the time, I pretty much had a big following. I think I was still around like the 40, 50K, and like I said, I had like a YouTube channel where I was explaining concepts, and I had a pretty big following to the point where I was working with, I don't want to butcher their name, but I think it's Wabi. It's like this exchange that's like overseas, and I was working and helping them on the marketing side of things, because at the time it was kind of big, to pay the influencers to promote things, but I wasn't really into that wave. But why it might seem that I'm coming out of nowhere, it's because every time we kind of witness a beer, right, it looks like we're getting new players, right? So people might not be familiar with my content because I didn't tweet much during like the NFT era. I didn't tweet much during like the DeFi. I was more of like behind the scenes looking at how everything was happening, right? And within the ordinals thing, I kind of discovered ordinals a couple weeks, not a couple weeks. Now it's been a couple months ago, right? So I started with the Ordi. I used to go on forums a lot. And then within these forums, I kind of discovered, right? So Domo had this JIT book where he kind of expressed the ideas behind BRC-20 tokens. He was explaining that everything was kind of experimental. He was explaining like different functions of like deployment and everything. So it kind of piqued my interest. And then what happened next was I was trying to catch like the next token. I'm like, okay, so already minted out, and then there's all these meme coins. What is the next big thing, right? And I think the other thing that caught my eye was like VMPX, right? And I was about to prepare to mint VMPX. What happened was it minted out like as I was opening my computer trying to get some VMPX. So I was like, okay, there must be something over there, right? And then when I discovered the Domo's, kind of chip book on BRC-20, and then I was kind of referred to Casey's, entire explanation of the ordinal protocol, right? So I'm like, all these years, there's been this huge wave of kind of innovation on Ethereum, right? It has been in the shadows for a while. So maybe this is a time with this innovation to see some, something new on it, right? And the entire meta BRC, how it came to be is like my tag phrase I usually say, this is the new meta, right? So we're looking maybe to build the right fundamentals on Bitcoin. So we've had experience with Ethereum. We've seen how DeFi works. We've seen how NFTs work. Are we trying to replicate what we've witnessed on Ethereum, or are we just trying to build new fundamentals and, explore new approaches to how previously built things, right? So this was the entire concept around Meta BRC. It was about just creating, this big community of people and enthusiasts who would be able to kind of, have access to these resources, community, and share experiments within us. So that's mostly the approach I had with Mercy. However, what happened was that it bypassed our expectations. I think you probably saw what happened the weeks leading up to the. So I started a series of thread called BTC, and I think not a lot of people were kind of familiar with it. Yeah, exactly. BTC Summer. I didn't even have time to like post the second and third part, but as you can see, I wrote a couple of threads on it, and it piqued people's interest, right? And I released the second one, and then I released the third one, and I think at the time I had like a couple millions, impressions on these tweets. I'm like, people seem to be interested in it. People don't understand yet how the technology works, how to download these wallets or even use them. So I took this as an opportunity to kind of create the Meta BRC movement and just build a community around it. That's how it kind of came. Yep.
Yeah, I for those that are listening, I have I have the blog pulled up where it says Money Printer, and you can see all of his history. I'm assuming most people actually don't even probably read this, right? Because it actually goes back quite decently, and there's a lot of stuff about it. So before we do dive into some of the specifics, though, like what were your initial thoughts of what Meta BRC could be? And I do want to kind of wrap this question up with some explanation, because there's been a few types of criticism I've seen casted your way. The first initial one was the claim that you copied BitGod's method of the kind of allow list opportunity, and that instead of an orange block, you used the blue one. So it looked very similar. And of course, this is more of a marketing play than it is a vision, because as we'll discuss later, it seems like there is a little bit of a difference in the progress of where the projects are going. But just tell us, like, what were the initial thoughts of where it could go? And then kind of followed up with that initial marketing to grow the Meta BRC account. Was it something that, maybe you liked what BitGod was doing, and so you wanted to borrow some of that, or you look up to him as somebody a leader in the space? And yeah, just to provide some details on that.
Yeah, 100%. So the idea, I think I was asked this question regarding like the blue contrast, the orange. So I hopped on the space once and explained the entire thing about the blue, right? So usually when we think about Bitcoin, we probably associate like, yellow or orange to coin. And I decided to stick with the blue because it represented a lot of like Ethereum, right? And it kind of fell into the catchphrase that I started on with the Meta BRC project. It's like the new meta, right? We're using Ethereum, as a ground base fundamentals to kind of rebuild new stuff on Bitcoin. That's the only reason I kind of used the blue. So it wasn't really, I mean, it kind of fell perfectly with the fact that maybe OXPT was using the orange, but I still like to think of it as like two different projects. And of course, initially when the entire Ordinals movement and wave came to me, I saw, BitGod within the spaces, and he was also trying to move like the entire space forward, which was a good thing. There's a couple other people that I can also mention that was like, these guys, their intentions are good. They're releasing a lot of alpha out there. These are people I followed, and I wanted to contribute as much as I could within this entire movement, right? And within, if I'm looking at the whitelist thing, so the whitelist isn't really something that's new, right? It's been here since like even during the NFT days, right? And I actually remember the first person who kind of impressed me with this entire whitelisting was Chura from Psychedelics, right? If some people do remember, he kind of launched Psychedelics in December. And within the span of a week or two, I think he went from 6K followers to like 120, right? And after he started using that, I think a lot of other projects started things we call the white schemes, right? It's just that it's not something that worked anymore within like the entire Ethereum NFT space, but maybe some other people kind of saw the opportunity to use it within the Bitcoin ordinal space. So that was more or less like my approach by using the whitelisting. And of course, if you tie all of this into like the bigger picture of using the whitelist as at the same time as like OXBT, of course, what happened then was that people weren't able to get kind of like who missed their opportunity with OXBT. They kind of saw an opportunity with MetaBRC, but it was nothing in regards to like copying what OXBT was doing or anything of the sort. It's just that we had this vision kind of even before creating MetaBRC, right? So I haven't talked about the team yet, but it's mostly we had a vision of always building something, whether it be on the Ethereum ecosystem or Ordinal's ecosystem, Bitcoin ecosystem. It's just that the opportunity kind of presented itself when the entire.
And tell us a little bit about how you decided to construct this team, because I know you have a Jern on your team who also has he's amassed quite a large following himself. He's also somebody that I've spoken with on spaces quite often. And then when I've gone into a few of the, the Meta BRC spaces, it looks like a combination of kind of like Azuki holders that maybe are familiar with the PFP. And then you have Jern, who's kind of built himself within the ordinal space specifically. How did you go about constructing this team, and how would you explain the strengths of those that are composed within Meta BRC?
100%. So when I first started Meta BRC, I've been in the space with kind of like, there's an artist that's called like Yannick. He does exceptional like artwork. He's extremely familiar with like 3D work, and he's built private projects. He's had experience like Web3 experience in building projects before, right? So we were kind of two within the team and like kind of launched a project. We didn't think it would, be what it is right now or even pick up as much as it did, right? So initially when I started kind of like the whitelist games, it became overwhelming way too fast, right? Because then you have to kind of manage the whitelist, you have to manage the art side, and then there was the dev side, and then there's all the other, marketing, research. And then at one point, I was the guy that used to do, educational threads. I stopped doing threads because I didn't have time anymore. So this is when I was approached by a group of like beings, right? These people were like, I don't exactly know the details or how it happened, but it's a group of people who were really tied to like the Azuki branch, and they're all like beings. So they kind of reached out to me, and that's how I met Mamba, right? So Mamba is, someone who's been within the space for a while. He's extremely well connected, and I think his name is Mamba, and he's helped me a lot in terms of like partnerships, or even in terms of the marketing side of the project, who to go to if we need certain things, certain thoughts about which partner to use when we're doing launches, and like connections within the space that helped us a lot, right? And then at the same time, I think Jern in Prince kind of reached out to me. So Jern is he became like this thread guy because he has the same passion for like Bitcoin as all of us share. So he messaged me and he said, I want to write a thread in regards to like Meta BRC. I've had lots of requests, but when I went through like Jern's page, I saw the content and the quality that he was delivering. And also like a lot of people kind of appreciated his content. He was doing lots of work with different people. I said, this is an opportunity also. It could be an opportunity for him to kind of, be a part of the Meta BRC. And he was kind of excited for the opportunity. So I saw something, that could be beneficial for both of us. And finally, the last person I had on the team was Prince. Prince was also someone who has, he had great connection. I think it's PR or PI. Yeah, his name is written weirdly, but if you go on the page, I think you can
I'll
see
find
all
him.
yeah, exactly. Someone who has great connection within the space. He's also like a very level-headed guy, and he's been helping a lot in, just the outreach to other projects, to different exchanges, and just the overall vision. So we started as, let's say, 5 people team, so that everyone had their different strengths. And of course, I was the one putting out like most of the marketing and the face of the project. But eventually, we did manage to add a dev on our side, and also other people that were kind of well versed in other areas, right? So when you build a project, you're probably looking for someone who can, manage marketing, someone operational, someone who can manage exchanges. So that's how the team kind of came to me.
You've definitely loaded your roster with quite a following, and those that are, it seems like most familiar with the PFP community. I like to claim and joke around that the PFP community is kind of like the PF paparazzi, right? So it comes with a lot of the humor, comes with a lot of the connections, right? They get to play the keeping up with the Joneses, and those type of people in this space that's full of attention. The attention economy is quite pivotal to the amount of success. But eventually you got to get past, right, the marketing gimmicks,
Yep.
and then move into the actual product. And so we sit here with MXRC, 100 million minted. It's one of the largest communities. I believe this is your treasury, 10%
Exactly.
at 10 million. And then you have a lot of people who've been amassing quite a lot. But of course, the big controversy comes with the Luminex launchpad. You found yourself, or the team found itself, and also Luminex in kind of this middle of this controversy. But from what I'd seen, Jern actually came on to my spaces that I hosted right after the launch. And I believe you and some others went into the larger one with Tia. So you weren't afraid to go in and, just take the brunt of what actually happened, although maybe it wasn't completely your fault or that your involvement about that. But first, addressing the criticism of just a straight, before we dive into the mint, of those saying that, you guys are a scam. I saw that posted consistently, those saying you guys are a rug and that it's a copycat. What would you like to say to those type of critics who maybe never looked into the project and they were just publicizing their thoughts on Twitter in a negative manner towards MetaBRC?
100%. So the first thing I probably like to say is, obviously when you start seeing a rug project, usually there's always, or most of the time, you're going to see some sort of, precedent to it, right? The first aspect I kind of want to address is the entire project was started as having the community first, right? So there's never a moment in time when we said we would be pricing any of our projects, right? So as of today, any release or even in regards to like the token, I think with the hype that was surrounding MetaBRC, I can pretty much confirm that the token could have came out with maybe 1 cent, 2 cent, and I think people would have still bought into the project, right? So this would have gone directly to like our treasury or into our pockets, right? Our intentions was never to make any money with the project, and of course, at some point, the project has to be kind of sustainable financially. But it wasn't one of our concerns initially. It was just to kind of onboard as many people as we can, and we often know that in order to onboard people within the space, money becomes, some kind of friction to this process. So we decided to offer a free mint. And of course, like you mentioned earlier, there was the entire Luminex situation, right? So what happened with the entire Luminex situation is they've had some pretty successful mints on their platform. So before us, we had the OXPT, and I think we had like the Doge punks, if I'm not mistaken. There were like other projects that minted successfully, right? And we've had this conversation because I think at the time MetaBRC was getting ready to mint, I think the hype was so high that bots kind of became like a concern of ours. So we spent about the entire week sleeping probably like 3-4 hours exchanging with the loot. We're like, these bots from Europe, they have this strategy. They probably do this and that to overload the website, and then this. And I think what happened is that within the first 2 minutes, bots or even the entire people who were looking to kind of affect the mint, they had a strategy and they were very like well prepared, right? This is something we weren't like expecting. So what happened? Of course, the mint didn't go as we wanted to. The whitelist was okay, but the public didn't go as we wanted to. The unfortunate thing is, as soon as the mint kind of ended, right? It's like the entire thing we did didn't serve any purpose anymore, right? We've seen spaces being started, MXRC a rug. We've seen like fake videos of people posting like this is how the bots did. These guys minted bought it their own public. We've seen also people posting wallets, and these are, I think, mostly people that don't really understand how wallets work because they said the first wallet belonged to like a bot or I don't know what. So in order to kind of try and change the narrative, what we did is I think the people from Luminex kind of went on TO space and they addressed the issue over there. And within our community, the second thing we did is we kind of did a space on the spot, just addressing everything that happened and explaining what was happening. And the only thing is that as the narrative was going, we didn't yet have any analysis of the situation, right? Because we were still waiting for Luminex to kind of build this report and explain this is the number of wallets that were affected, how the bots were affected. And I think the hardest part was probably waiting until you kind of got this analysis, right? And however, it still didn't change the fact that bots kind of managed to mint and they were now holding like huge amounts of MXRC. I think that was probably the most difficult part. We had a lot of people who were kind of like overseas waiting for this mint to happen. They weren't able to mint and then they just ran away from the project, not interested anymore. And there were different narratives happening. But if you actually look at everything the team has been doing since like the beginning of, this entire project, which is like 3 to 4 weeks old, there hasn't been a single token, sold by the team. I don't think we've done anything that would suspect us, to be wanting to profit financially off of this. Unless we have, unless someone has like proof we sold anything, I don't really understand where the FUD is actually coming from. And one thing people also have to remember is that a lot of these projects, right, these launch pads, compared to Ethereum, where you can actually launch your projects you want to launch anytime, when you have to deal with these launch pads, they often require some sort of KYC, or at least to make sure that, your team is as authentic or as stacked as you pretend it to be, right? They want to see some sort of roadmap. And that's one thing I've, actually discussed with the team. And one thing we actually appreciate about the ordinals, right? So there's no other platform where you can create your token. You have to go through these launch pads, and these launch pad have like a vetting process to make sure that whatever they're providing their community isn't a scam, right? So these are the first steps, but I guess to address the rest of the FUD, it'll be in the long run. So we're still building things behind the scenes, and I think the only thing we can do is probably build until people change their opinions, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot that's going on. And, I talked with Aaron afterwards. He was asking for some advice and just some thoughts on everything. Yeah, it's tough in this space to know who's behind the screen, right? What are everyone's attentions, especially when you come in with such a meteoric rise. It was a little bit different. Everyone kind of has a little bit of a different story. And for those that are listening, the episode right before this, I had Jerry on, who's one of the co-founders of Luminex. So I highly advise go listen to that because he also shares a lot of information on their vetting process and how they go about Luminex. And he talks a little bit about that situation of everything that happened with the bots. It's just always a chaotic situation, but it feels like you guys have been able to move past it. Unfortunately, the prices dropped dramatically, which is okay because it puts you in this situation. It's kind of a prove it situation, right? It's down to the floor, pretty much as low as it could go. And now it's up to the team to figure out how they're going to provide value to its holders. And I think that's one of the best. And I would say it's one of the most motivating situations as a founder when it's down that far and you're like, all right, people have left and now the real believers are here. And it's time for us to really, put up or shut up as much as possible. And so now you find yourself in this situation. I've seen a few different tactics and on your website, right, it says something about a treasury, a DAO, an auction, a proposal. And I had pulled up here. This tweet was from, I believe, 2 days ago at the time of this recording. The first burn is here. Eligible top 775 holders. The MXRC holders will be able to claim an ordinals for 10,000 MXRC. And then it has 3 different tiers and a snapshot Is this the first solution to this, bot situation? I'm sure the days after that, the team got together to really figure out and strategize. Take us through the thought process of the team that led you to this first action item that succeeds the kind of debacle or the situation with Luminex.
Yeah, 100%. So after the first, the situation with Luminex happened, I think our next step was how could we bring, as much value as to our current holders as fast as possible, right? And the entire Meta BRC, of course, we had like a plan, a roadmap, and a strategy behind it, right? Because starting within the ordinal space, we kind of understand the lack of infrastructure right now. We kind of understand the limitation that BRC-20 tokens have. You can't really use it anywhere else unless you're in like the Bitcoin ecosystem. And even within the token, you can't really do the things people are used to doing on Ethereum, like staking and other things, right? Everything that's currently happening is kind of experimental. So the first thought process is, of course, how can we offer value through the MXRC token? And the only great answer we found to that was to create an ecosystem around the MXRC token, that would kind of incentivize people to use the token within that ecosystem, right? So if you kind of build an ecosystem that's attractive enough and open enough to outside people, then what they would want to do would be to invest in that MXRC and then eventually enter the ecosystem to participate in the different activities, right? And one of the mechanisms we found that worked perfectly well with that was we kind of watch what happened again on like the Ethereum side of things. And as we're building new things on Bitcoin, we saw that DAOs had lots of power and involved kind of like the entire community on Ethereum, right? There's great examples of DAO, like, Nouns DAO. There's like, and of course, one of our things that we wanted to do was kind of analyze how these people were doing it, but also address some of their shortcomings, right? And in order to incentivize people to kind of use the MXRT token, we're building this kind of ecosystem that rewards our holders through different releases, right? So every time we're going to be having a release or a new product that's going to come out, it's going to be using the MXRC token. So I think just by incentivizing people through that, I think we'll be able to attract a lot of newcomers. And of course, we started teasing a couple of things on the website, like the treasury, which are MXRC. We're hoping in the near future, when we've provided enough utility, that we can actually start seeing this MXRC being used as tokens to fund many creators within the space, right? And we've also kind of teased the DAO aspect, where we'd like to kind of build a community where people would be able to make votes on how they want things to move, maybe in the entire Bitcoin ecosystem, right? I think it's great to always be supportive of people who are building, but at the same time, I think it's important to choose projects that would keep the space moving forward. So I think that's the first initiative we had. But the thought process after the mint was, how can we provide value as fast as possible? And of course, one problem we kind of fell into was that the way the community sees value being given to them is not the same as like how the team envisions it, right? So a lot of the time, I think a lot of people mention like listings, like you have to be listed on CX, you have to be listed on DEXs. So I think that's one of the big challenges, right? I think this entire thing is pretty new. Liquidity or even interest is not yet up to the standards of like Ethereum or even other ecosystems, right? Sometimes people might assume or think that having more listings equals higher prices, right? But there's no value in that if the token has no utility, right? And I've been saying that a lot of time because I was also like one of the first buyers of like Ori, VMPX, and all these tokens. And I can tell you right now, I'm about 90% at least down on my investment because I bought from these CXs. And I want people to kind of not make the same mistakes because I've been making them since like 2016. So sometimes it's just about, listening to the community, but also knowing your project and your vision well enough that, you believe that in the long run, you'll be able to provide the value that you want to provide.
Yeah, you are taking quite a different take in this. DAOs are very popular on Ethereum. The DAO model on ordinals is still to be determined.
Yep.
What are the thought processes around the DAO? How do you plan to utilize that? Are you looking into things like Oshi Finance to use like their boss model to create a DAO? Are you setting it up in a customized fashion for MetaGood, or how take us through the initial thought process?
Yeah, so the thought process is, so currently I'm kind of exploring. I haven't mentioned this before, but we're kind of, talking to other researchers within the entire space. And 2 days ago, I was speaking with like a Twitter user who's called Clueless. So he's mostly a DAO researcher, and he's been exploring different DAOs, like, and just making sure of these small things, right? Because usually what happens in DAOs is that people who have the most token or the more money or the more power, it's called like the tyranny of the majority, right? So people that have the lesser vote can't really decide on anything, right? And with this approach, he's kind of exposing me new concepts and new ideas, right? Because as much as I'm within the space, I don't know about all the good ways to build a DAO. That's why I probably have a team and work with different groups. So we're exploring things like quadratic functioning with the voting process. So there's a lot of things on our current bucket list, right? And of course, before implementing anything, there's going to be some sort of test phase. But we kind of have like a general idea of the we're looking towards to becoming DAOs that are working properly right now, and some of their shortcomings. So we're still in like the exploratory phase. We're kind of exploring every DAO and coming up with like how we want everything to be done. And the thing with even in the ordinals, right? Whether we want to look at the Oshi model or other models, they're still like in infancy phase, right? I don't think there's much we can kind of take from them yet. I think one of the best things is probably look at what worked in the past, try and see how it works, address the shortcomings, and try and implement it the way that matches our community.
It's a very experienced answer. So I can tell that you've been doing this for a little while. So I do appreciate that. To go back a little bit to this burn, I believe you called this NFT collection, the ordinals, where you have to burn 10,000 and sort of penny, right? It's really what, $100 or $10. So it's really not that much when you think about it. 50% of it said it was getting burned. The other 50% is going to the treasury. What is you mentioned the treasury, the DAO treasury is to fund other creators in the space. The other 50% being burned or being effectively sent to Satoshi's wallet, right? Because if Satoshi happens to wake up, we have much bigger issues than just him dumping MXRC. But what is the utility or use case for the ordinals, the image? Is it just purely art, or is there plans to use this within the ecosystem in some sort of utilitarian?
Yeah, of course. So the first thing in respect to like the ordinals or even, PFPs in general is just, this having this sentiment of like belonging to a community, right? Not only that, but often PFPs of, they're if I take for instance like the nouns DAO, right? Their NFT nouns are used to, vote on proposals, right? So this is one of the approaches we want to have, because the ordinals, the way we see it, they're kind of, we're valuing our, dearest holders, the ones who've been with us like within this entire, fumble and everything, but we're trying to reward them as much as possible. And these are the people we kind of want on the long term of it, right? So it's definitely going to have a lot of value. And these people kind of dictate the way our entire DAO project is going to move forward. And of course, for the people who don't have like enough MXRC or, the funding, we have something else coming, right? That's being built behind the scenes right now. So you can see the ordinals as the main collection that allows you to have voting rights within, the vote on proposals and have certain benefits. And also in terms of like, if we ever provide resources or work with different projects, these are also benefits that are given to ordinals holders, right? There has to be some incentive for people to, want to be a part of that ordinal collection. So this is mostly the avenue we're currently exploring. It might be subject to change depending on different people or the people we're talking with, but that's mostly how it's going to operate right now.
I appreciate those who go to experiment and adventure. There is really no roadmap in this place, and especially once the hype dies down. And this is the same with any NFT ecosystem on any blockchain. Once the hype comes down, this is when you need to start releasing products so that people can use the type of coins. But moving, I guess, past MXRC a little bit. What do you think of the future of ordinals itself? Do you think BRC-20 is the end, or you say the final product of this new type of fungible quote unquote fungible currency on Bitcoin? Do you see a way to improve it, or are you kind of just waiting around and seeing what happens?
I'm 100% sure that this is kind of like the new beginning, right? So I'm pretty confident that we're going to be, witnessing different standards coming very soon, and not only like a month after BRC-20 was kind of released. I think we saw all these derivatives like SRC. We saw stamps happening, and then we saw OKX kind of launching this BRC-30, which allowed staking functionalities, right? I think as long as we're kind of promoting, allowing people to keep on experimenting, I think that's probably what's going to be, giving us a lot more standards, a lot more new things to experiment on. I think it's pretty difficult to say how long it's going to take until we kind of move away from this standard. I think, being first to something, or usually the first releases of a standard or anything of the sort usually lasts a long time before we actually see some sort of innovation. And I think pretty much everyone in the space can agree on the fact that a lot of infrastructure is currently lacking, right? So it's pretty much difficult to build anything that makes sense right now. And I also like to remind people that being a founder in Ordinal is not as sexy as they think, right? It's probably the most difficult thing. So one of the most difficult things like people can go through, especially this time, right? Like who would be crazy enough to kind of in the middle of a bear market go into an ecosystem that doesn't even have infrastructure and release a token instead of like an art collection, right? So this is like 10 times harder than anything people can think of. But I think we're going to move past this standard because people are looking for utility for the BRC-20. I think people are also expecting, if we're looking at people moving from like Ethereum and coming to Ordinal, they're going to be expecting some type of the same functionalities, right? People are used to like DeFi in a way. They're used to having the ability to stake or contribute to like liquidity pools. I think in the short term, for them to be, to stay and move into Bitcoin, they're going to be expecting these sort of things. Like I said, I don't know how long it's going to take, but I think this is just the beginning. This is only like what, 5 to 6 months old. So there's still a long way to go, right? And especially right now, we're on Bitcoin, which I like to call the mother chain, right? So we're back to like the source. It's a great time to be building. It has historical, significance. And I also like the fact that, the community comes up with their own thing, right? Like this attributes, it's something that's not possible on like, I also know that you're kind of like a big guy on inscriptions recently. So I might have to, we might have to get a conversation on that later. But I think this is just the beginning, but we're definitely going to go a lot further than where we're at right now.
Yeah, I work at Emblem Vault, and we've facilitated the beginning of ordinals, right? We allowed the ability to trade Bitcoin punks on OpenSea, which kind of helped provide that initial liquidity, that interest. We did the same thing with inscriptions. I'm a firm believer, and it's only been really reinforced over the last, for me, over the last 2 years when I started with historical NFTs and then Emblem Vault. You mentioned that, you dabbled in DeFi Summer, you've been around the space. What are your thoughts on a multi-chain future? Is it something that you believe is an inevitability where we're using different chains for certain types of assets? We're taking, BRCs over to ETH, or using it for Solana of some sort. Is there a high degree of compatibility with these blockchains? And is it something that you've looked into for MetaBRC possibly in the future?
100%. I think it's currently much needed, right? Just because of some of the issues I mentioned earlier, like, lack of liquidity. And also people are still kind of, reluctant to kind of join the ordinals movement and the entire Bitcoin ecosystem, right? You still have a lot of degens on like Ethereum. I think they're gonna stay there until we have some kind of structure with Bitcoin, right? So if it's possible for us to kind of bring them, within the ecosystem, it'll be through a bridge, right? When I first started the entire meta BRC, or even within the crypto space, I think each blockchain has its own strengths, right, and own weaknesses, right? And I think interoperability was probably one of the top priorities of most blockchains, right? Just having these different connections between blockchains, not only allow lots of liquidities, but what's not possible on one chain, at least your product can be able to do it on another chain, right? So that's why I'm absolutely pro like anything that's a bridge or even cross chain or interoperability. I don't see no other way for us to move forward, or even other ecosystems.
That's my firm belief as well. That's why we try to facilitate a lot of this stuff. So yeah, we'll have to talk after this because we are doing our own BRC-20 product too, which I think was one of our initial conversations. It's so tough to deny, although it's tough to deny that, Ethereum has a much superior financial tooling, infrastructure, and liquidity. And then Bitcoin has these real, hard, there's like pristine collateral, I think is as they say. You have Bitcoin, the underlying asset, and then BRC-20 is kind of this, pristine fungible token. It's inefficient, but it's a high degree decentralization. Although there is indexers, the asset is on a SAT, which isn't going to change at any point in time. Right. And it seems like there's going to be somebody that builds on top of it. As you mentioned, I think it comes from your experience as well. That it's really tough to predict what products are going to pop up, but you just have to prepare that there will be something that somebody will build, or at least you hope so. That's going to project us into the future to create a more efficient market. But until then, you really just got to go where the infrastructure is. And a lot of users, sometimes they just don't want to leave their chains because for whatever reason, that it really is, the sense of tribalism, but as we do wind this down, how would you define the community that stuck around with MetaBRC and maybe your own following, Good, of those that have followed you over the years through your educational content? Where do you feel the community is now? How would you describe that? And what is your goal what is the goal of the community moving forward?
Yeah, so in regards to the community, so since I started like the entire crypto journey, unfortunately, a lot of them aren't really here anymore. So I kind of had to rebuild like a new community, right? And it started during this entire, ordinals / NFT era where I started kind of releasing new educational content. In terms of the community that are still sticking with the MetaBRC, I think it's probably a community that's going to go like a long way, right? I mean, there's no worse situation to be in right now as a holder. I've been through it. I've been one of those guys who's like, what are you guys doing? What is the team doing? So I think even today in the Discord, people were like, the team is probably taking like a beer somewhere. So I'm not like, but the good thing is I'm still focused pretty much on the vision, right? And, my biggest wish right now is probably to make it up to the community and just trying to build and come up with something that brings the value back. And of course, if we manage to, cover the ground that we've lost and just provide value, I think it's going to be natural that the community comes back together. And at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for new ideas. We're looking for people to, keep faith and stay motivated on building within this chain. And that's just what I'm hoping for the BRC community.
I'm really excited to hear. I'm excited to follow along. As I told you, I've been a holder. I've also bought in many tops. I've bought in many bottoms, but you gotta, you just gotta hold down in this space. It's just like, DeFi Summer and all these other ones. If you're in early and you just hold on and participate in some of these ecosystems that you have a belief in, it's really just about survival. It's just about making it through the bear market. And then when the flood comes, when the infrastructure is a lot better, then everyone really succeeds. All boats, right? Even quote unquote, I'm not calling you guys a shitcoin, but like even the shittiest coins, right, all rise during a bear market when the money's around and people are flying. And then the really cream of the top, of course, is those 1,000Xs and 10,000Xs that everyone really looks for from a financial standpoint. But I appreciate you for coming on, and I hope your first interview was just like you, and we covered pretty much everything, and look forward to seeing where MetaBRC goes, where your brand goes, and glad to see that, you're not the quote unquote scammer, as everyone likes to say, but as I've learned too, working at Emblem Vault, you really can't satisfy everybody. All you got to do is just keep putting your actions forward, and that'll speak for yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today, Jake, and looking forward to keep building in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for listening and watching. We'll catch you next time.